All right, so it is week 12 attendance, and this is my recording before I head out to break. And hopefully, you all got the message I sent out yesterday about the signups for the code review that happened after the break. And I think you did because several of you, several students in my JavaScript and my Python classes signed up. So I'm hoping you get that. But if for some reason you didn't, I also posted it on Discord. And I think maybe is, well, actually, do I need to post it here? I don't know. So hopefully you're good with that. And, hopefully this extra week is going to give you a little more time to think about this, to work on it. And I almost say that with a hesitation because it's not my goal to have you work on spring break. Honestly, I've been working hard on my own examples, so I didn't have to work as hard on break. So I'm actually in a good place with my Dev 1 new updated example. But before I go there, I just want to talk about, and I was looking at, you can see on my screen, I was looking at reviewing again the requirements for Dev 1 because your work last night met most of these requirements, and that's honestly why I did what I did over the last 3 weeks, where we actually built upon those examples, because now we're into code that has more depth, does more things, so it takes longer to build that base code up. But what I want to do first today is I want to go over a very common thing that happened in last night's output for several of you, and it's really understandable because what happened was when Andrew showed his examples of the To Do and the Notes app, what he was doing is when he hit that edit button, and I'll show you, just briefly go over that, by actually having the URL include the UUID, then on the new page, grabbing that UUID, finding that specific entry in your computers, what you've stored inside JavaScript. Remember, that's just from what you've brought from local storage. And the key to this, though, is once you get that, is to render that page with that data. So that's part of the challenge. And then once, if you want to allow the user to change something, you need to first you need to capture that change, and then you need to or send that updated data to that function that you have that updates the stimulus. Okay, the stimulus data, right? First, just the new calculation of the check amount, and that's something he didn't have to do. Okay, so that's why this last step I did to actually, and I knew not everyone that would be a challenge, but I'm impressed how far you got. Okay, and that's why thinking about this should help you again down the road to get Dev 1 done. So what I'm going to do here is because last attendance, matter of fact, week 11 attendance, I looked and there's not as many people replying, but I looked at the views and you've watched it. I think many of you have watched that, and I hope that helps. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to focus on the edit part of this. Okay, and then after I do that, I'm going to just briefly show you my Dev 1 almost done example. Okay, so for the week 11, which I went over already, just basically how this was done. But when you click, right, so here's the key, is when you click on an entry, right, and by the way, you can also inspect, it's really good to do this, and see that through my code, I had rendered a ref, and that link has that actual pointer. That's where you grab out of that however, whatever variable you've done on the global namespace to have that ID, okay? So that when you click on it, then what happens here is, and let me just go to my source code. Let me actually make this just a little bigger so we can see it. Sorry, it's not making it bigger. There we go. Okay, so let me just, now it's made it, of course, too big. Let me bring it down just a little bit. So on my edit page, when I bring this, that's my edit index, right? Oh, but while we're here, right, the key is that you can also reference, and he showed this too, and this is the reason you separate your code into that function so that all the things that you might want to lean upon function wise are setting in this. So if I come into my JS file, this edit, right? So what I'm doing here, just to bring this over, right? We're using this hash in order to grab this ID off of the URL. And then we're going out to get from local storage all the saved, for me, I called them get save requests. That code, as far as running it, is pulled out of that functions. It's really no different than when we did it at the main screen. But in this case, what we're doing is also finding that specific request. Okay, so because now that we have the ID, we find it. And then we say, if for some reason that URL gets messed up, let's just send the user back to the index page. And then I set a pointer, a reference to the detail here. And I did this a little different, and I'm going to scroll down and show you here, is I ended up running 3 functions, okay, 4 actually, to generate each of my inputs, or 3 of the inputs in the button. So I did that. And the reason I did that was because they were getting fairly involved, right? Because I had to render, I had to recreate this selector, grab this, but let me just walk through one of them, right? So let's actually do this one right here. And let me just stop right here and say this. On the dev1 requirements, it's not that you have to let the user update all of them. You could have selected just one of these to update. It makes sense to, if you're really developing something in the real world, you give the user the ability to edit all the information, right? But for our requirements, if you only did one, that would be okay. But it's good to know how. So let's just look at this one, which is generate adjusted income. So if I come over here to generate adjusted income, I create that input element. I set its attribute as number, which is just what I basically did in the HTML in the index before. I'm just recreating this through JavaScript, right? And then I make it required, again, trying to do some validation. And then I say this adjusted income, which is my input, which is here. The thing I do before I return this new input is I say adjusted input dot value, which is its value, is going to be equal to that request dot adjusted income. So remember, what I'm getting is when I search for that request, I now have that available to me on my global namespace, right? So then I can just say that value in this input field is equal to what I found by looking in my computer's whatever that global I want to say variable, but it is a variable. It contains an object of array, array of objects, and then I just return it. Okay, so here's what I've done, and the reason I've returned it is I appended after that. So it's really in the generate button. So now that I've built all of these DOM elements based on that one specific entry, this is where it happens that I actually generate the button add an event listener. Okay. And I think this is the part that threw you off, and it's totally understandable why. Is again, Andrew didn't do this because he didn't have anything that needed to have a calculation. His was just a value that he sent back. Now he did still, and he updated it. But in this case for us, right, what I did is I set that event listener. I actually made some assumptions here. I just said whatever, when this is clicked, whatever the value that I rendered into these fields, just take them. Now, I didn't have to do that. I actually could have done some logic to look at that, but I decided just for straightforwardness at this point, I'm just going to grab whatever values are here, not really looking to see if the user had updated them. So in a sense, what I could have done is not run this if the user hadn't updated them, but because I assumed just those values, I went ahead and said, let check them out is by running determine amount pass in that request, and then returning this amount, and then request. So I'm updating, remember this request, this one specific entry. I'm updating that check amount, and then I save that, and then I send it back to the index page. Okay. So that's how, now you can approach this different ways, but that's how I did it. Is basically once you find, right? So this code right here, once you find that in the computer's memory, again, what's brought in from local storage, then you can use those values to render the DOM, and then you would have an event listener that would update that and again, that variable in your global namespace, ultimately updating local storage and then sending it back. So I know it's quite a few steps there. Okay. So I just wanted to give you an example of a way I approached it, right? And then so what you can see here is I do that in here, but after I render, and this is just to render to the page, is I just put this at the end after I'd rendered each of the DOM elements, then I just appended them into that div that I had created. And again, the way I've set up my pages, they could either return now without updating, of course, but then if I set this to, right, then this event listener would then, whatever those values were, whenever I hit click, then it's going to go run all of that code and then update this here. I think it did update it. I always have to make sure. Let's see. Is it updating? Married. It almost seems like it's not. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. See? I just put random numbers in here. Let's just do that. Update. Oh, good. It is updating. So anyway, that's my example. I hope that description helps you out. So here's what I want to show. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit, right? So whatever if you got to where you got to the edit page, and I saw, even if you didn't get the update completely done, I gave you most of the points, but really I want you to think about that's what you want to, this is actually a really important part of getting your dev one done. So I want to tell you, I worked on my example, and I want to give you just some things I got to remember in doing it. And I'll go over it. I'm not going to go over it in detail. I'm actually thinking I will post this into public. Matter of fact, you can reply here if you'd like me to. And I almost hesitate showing this because this is my example where I'm trying to do some things that I haven't done before. And it was fun, but here's what I'm really telling you is that I found it was really helpful to do the design first. And in doing the design, I actually ended up putting some data in here that's not dynamically generated, but makes it look like a logged in user, because ultimately that's way I would want in my program, because I actually think this is something I'm going to continue to work on, is like you would have a logged in user, right? So even though this is just static content in the index, I decided I would go ahead and make it look like that. So imagine you and I have used apps enough to know, especially if something in a tracking system, the first thing you're going to do when you get an app, it's going to ask you some basic data about your specific, personal data around what you're tracking. And so for this, it's my EV cost. So I ended up just creating, and I used I built this on the same idea of the Flexbox that I saw before. And so, and what I like about this as well is that it flexes really nicely to where once you get down, and these are media queries, and again, not part of this class, but having some basic CSS is really helpful. To where then it drops my main, and they call these asides, right? So I liked that. So what I ended up doing for my particular idea was because I really thought about this, because this is something I really want to do, is I imagined Like if and like I'm not unusual. There's actually several million people like me at this point who have EV cars, and understanding how much that car is costing you from a charging perspective is important because you want to know that. And so what I did is I gave the user two ways to enter. I gave them a quick, what I call a quick entry here, right? And then I gave them a more detailed entry, right? So they could do one or the other. I still did the validation. I still did my, and again, minimum validation is required, but what we've said is we want to do more than that, right? But in this case, the other thing I've done here is given them the detailed one, which of course required more inputs. And in this case, I leaned upon, right, what the browser already has. I mean, the browser already has for date and time some nice things set up here, right? So that you can just make, this is cheap for us developers to do. All I had to do was set a particular data type, right? So this is giving me more detail that I'm assuming in this entry because I wanted to make it quick. So on a daily basis, making a quick entry. But if I wanted to go back in and fill in data that I had from the past, because like here's my purchase date, I'd want to do that. But here's really the part that I'm actually kind of proud of is that what I did is if you enter, get home and I have 20 miles in the tank, I hit submit. It's not necessarily, actually it did show up. It was right here, right? Tells me how much it costs, but it actually updates this dynamically, which was fun to do. And I found out some new ways to do it. I'm just looking at this because I see a bug that it's actually not showing my August entries. I found that the other day. I was actually playing with it, and it was that let me see if this is actually and this is part of what you get to play with. I think what I ended up having to do is 30 or 31 because I have actually a month thing that I have to do. Supercharge. Let's say 1. Let's say I put in 50. Right. There we go. Did it pull it? Yeah, finally it pulled in the March ones. So, anyway, again, this is not what you have to do, but what was great is in thinking about one of the requirements, for it was actually, and again, I'm not suggesting this, but one of the things you need to do is come up with two examples of using JavaScript that's not covered in this course. So, for me, I ended up using some other JavaScript. I don't even remember them right now. I have to go look, but that would do some of that summary data for me. I ended up building an object that had each month, and I had to do that dynamically, right, from the purchase date to the current date. And actually, that's why that one didn't work here. But what was great is these actually worked. And then the other thing is instead of listing, I listed the most current entries, right? I actually limited this dynamically. The other thing I did is based on the location, I changed the output as well. And then I did a total entries. And then what I'm going to do here is give them a page that actually shows all the entries that they want to look at. But I decided I didn't want to list them all because there could be a lot. And so I ended up doing some dynamic stuff to just do some sorting to calculate the most current entries. So then if I'm going back and doing some historical stuff, they're not going to show up, but I can still look at them. But like I said, I'm actually really, this might not be the most beautiful output I've ever created, but it's more importantly for me, it's really the most functional. Like this is something I can use, which is really kind of what makes it fun to work on something like this. But my point about this too, and I really appreciate it, and I don't think Naomi would mind. She came to see me yesterday and we talked about for her particular idea, what would be some of the JavaScript she could use. So one of the things she and I talked about, and again, this is kind of her idea, but was using a pie chart in some of hers. And Google has a great, some wonderful, easy to use code to create pie charts. And actually, I've been thinking about doing that here. Like I could have some simple pie charts to actually, because we are visual people who like that. So anyway, enough of that. So I hope you have a good break. I'm going to continue. Where I'm at now with mine is I actually am on the edit, so I have to actually bring that in and do that edit, and which got me really thinking about kind of what you all ran into this week, which is I asked myself, like, what, and first I have to, I'm going to use that same concept. And by the way, two of you, Andrew and Jonathan, both did an in-place edit using a little different concepts of JavaScript, but it's okay as long as you can edit, and he edited both of them on the same page. That's fine. I like going to a separate page depending on the level of edit that you're doing. So it's not that it's required, it's just the example that we've seen through this course is actually using that UUID like I talked about before, right? Grabbing that and then finding that particular record, rendering, and this is going to be a repeat, but it's worth, grabbing that individual, for me, I call them entries, right? And then grabbing those pieces of that in that object, re-rendering them to the screen, then figuring out how I do the update process. What do I want to allow the user to update? Because I might, in my example, not want to allow them to update all of them. I might give them the beginning and ending miles, but not the location and not the date. I don't know. I'm gonna think through that, but that's the kind of stuff I'm gonna complete and work on and talk about afterwards. So, have a great break. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.